The situation between Russia and Ukraine is not getting any easier, it's not getting any better. It appears that this is one of those situations where unfortunately it's going to have to get worse before it actually gets better. Welcome to the Daily Crossing. My name is Marvin Del Valle. We want to introduce a perspective, and by the way, we are going to intentionally keep this very short. And what that means is that unfortunately, I'm going to have to oversimplify a number of concepts to be able to cover what we wanted to cover. About 6 months ago, with a couple of friends, we were having a conversation before this conflict took place about the new emperor and the new Rome. And we were actually referring to the relationship that was developing between President Vladimir Putin and the actually head of the Russian Orthodox, the Patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church, Patriarch Kirill. With that being said, we want to see if we can break it down in using two different components. One of it is the historical secular component, and then we're going to go into the religious component. So the secular, obviously history is very well known. There's nothing there that you couldn't research by yourself. By the way, anything that we tell you here today, we are inviting you to do your own research to make sure that you can come up to your own conclusions. We are just introducing our perspective to this conversation. So the first thing is we all go back to the end of 1991. Former Soviet Union is breaking apart. Belarus and Ukraine happens to be one of those big states that were actually connected to the former Soviet Union, right? Whether people, agree that that was a good thing to do, that was not necessarily the best thing to do, that's a historical fact. So under the presidency of Mikhail Gorbachev, right, the transition goes from him to President Boris Yeltsin, who actually, his delegations goes to the United Nations. They make what is supposed to be a proper registration of continuity between the seat that was already occupied by the former Soviet Union, to the new seat, to occupy the same seat, as a matter of fact, under the name of the Russian Federation. So with that being said, Belarus and Ukraine was also treated as independent states. A lot of things are being disputed as to whether or not that was the proper registration. Did they have the right to be an independent state or not? As a matter of fact, Ukraine is even arguing as to whether or not the registration for Russia is a valid registration, so they want to remove the veto power that they have today within the United Nations. That, again, is going to be for you to decide which one has any validity or not. Then enters Vladimir Putin, right? Former KGB agent, who actually grew up under the former Soviet Union, but, came in as a pro-democracy type of individual. As time went by, and I mean time went by, this is 21 years under his government and presidency, right? 21 years later, it's very difficult to understand or accept the fact that somebody can be in power for that many years without start thinking about the possibility of some kind of new, some new dictator. That would be, again, for you to decide. But the fact of the matter is that as time went by, one of the grievances that he started to make very public was the fact that that breakup was not properly managed. That many of the countries that ended up claiming independency and ended up separating was never meant to separate. So there is a political component, but now they are arguing Ukraine was supposed to be there. There's a very large Russian community that is within the Ukrainian borders. And so somewhere, somehow, Putin is making the argument, we're trying to protect those citizens. By the way, we're trying to protect every citizen. It's very difficult for them to make that argument with a straight face with all the images that we're seeing coming out. It's unfortunately nothing but devastation, death. What's going to come out of it is nothing less than destruction. So it's very unfortunate. But here's the fact of the matter. For many years, a lot of people looked at Vladimir Putin with a great deal of respect. You can't argue against a person who actually saying, I love my own country, I want to bring it back to the glory days. And in many ways, he managed to do that. He managed to put Russia right back into the global discussion and became a player again. Taking a few years, their opinion today and the fact that they have the ability to run politics in a different way is incredible. Let's go into the religious component. I think that's super important now to see if we can merge the two together, right? right? So we got to go back to the original days of what we call the foundation of the Christian churches. Guys, I'm talking specifically about apostolic churches, right? They come through an apostolic tradition. This has nothing to do with Christians that are separated from the apostolic churches, nothing to do with Martin Luther, nothing to do with any of the churches that when you're thinking about the Adventists, it has nothing to do. I'm talking about the group of churches that even today they call themselves apostolic churches. So what brings significance to that tradition? Well, it's Christ himself that says, Peter, you are rock. Upon you, I will build my church. I will give you the keys to the kingdom. Those words, right, created a specific line of tradition, right? And uninterrupted. This is 2,000 years of a church that has been being passed down from one bishop to another bishop. And the claim is that every single one of those bishops is absolutely connected to that original foundational moment, right? Now, in the case of the Roman Catholic Church, right, for the Catholics, the Pope is Peter. Right? So obviously the argument of primacy and supremacy has been there almost from day one. That doesn't mean that everybody agreed to it. But for many, many hundreds of years, right, the church found a way to come together and function together that had a lot to do with the participation of the Emperor Constantine, right? Now, good things came out of it. Some challenging things came out of his actual sponsorship, right? The good things is that he managed to come up with a common creed, a common way of saying, this is what we believe. We believe in one God, is the way that actually creed will start. Second of all, he ended up, one of the challenges is that he moved the empire from Rome into Byzantium. Eventually, that city was called Constantinople, right? So what ended up happening from a religious perspective? Two things, right? First of all, the sponsorship of the emperor, the sponsorship of the state. Number two, the bishop of the Patriarch of Constantinople, immediately just the proximity of the emperor ended up giving them a place of privilege. You know, if the Pope of Rome was called first among equals, and then again, even that title was rejected, saying, no, we're not equals. There's supremacy, there's primacy, right? But then somewhere, somehow, that title ended up overlapping to the Patriarch of Constantinople. Literally being able to say, first among equals, again, that ended up falling into his lap. Also, at some point, a little disputed, but it was actually the emperor who actually said that the only second to the Bishop of Rome, right? Again, some of these things you're going to agree with, some of them you can potentially disagree, but that's the way history has been developing, and that's been part of the conversation that took place between these churches. Now, it's significant for me to tell you that the empire grew, and what that means is that through that bishop, through the patriarchate, beautiful things would build, beautiful churches. The Hagia Sophia today is located, by the way, the city of Constantinople is where the city of Istanbul happens to be today within the country of Turkey, right? Now, this beautiful basilica, which is called the Hagia Sophia, originally built by the Emperor Constantine, and then eventually by his mother, St. Helen. It ended up cutting on fire, so Justinian ended up building what today still stands as one of them. At some point, what was the most beautiful building, there was a monument for Christianity, and everything of the glory of Christianity expanding throughout the planet, throughout the globe. And the Byzantine church, or the Orthodox church, was playing an incredible role at that point. But as you know, eventually the Muslim faith ended up conquering that territory in that area. Today, the Patriarchate of Constantinople has been reduced to only a few blocks. There really is no more prominence and no more power. Bartholomew I, which is the Patriarch today of Constantinople, and I've used the reference Constantinople as a historical reference from the religious content. Obviously, there is no more Constantinople. But Bartholomew I today has a phenomenal relationship with the Pope of Rome. So, that relationship has been improving and getting better. But within the sponsorship, or what was believed to be the sponsorship of the leadership and guidance of the Patriarch of Constantinople, there's many other churches, including the Russian Orthodox. This is nothing new. It goes back to almost the 1500 when the Russian Orthodox Church started to claim the possibility that they were going to be the new Rome. Why? Obviously, as the presence of the Patriarch and the power and the almost authority of the Patriarchate of Constantinople was being challenged, this somewhere somehow have to go somewhere else. The growth of the Russian Orthodox Church started to take place. There was the sponsorship also of the Tsars. But as you know, during the time of the former Soviet Union, that all went away. The former Soviet Union declared himself to be an atheist state. Therefore, the church ended up being persecuted, and a lot of things went wrong during that time. They destroyed many beautiful churches. But today, 21 years later, after being under the direction and the presidency of Vladimir Putin, an interesting relationship has started to develop between the state and the church. Today, a country that was almost like down to 10% Christian is almost back up to 70% Christian Orthodox, right? So that has put the position of the Patriarch of Russia into a very prominent position. Now, what makes it even more special? Guess what? It's one of the few churches that doesn't have to worry about the separation between church and state. It's one of the very few churches that actually has the sponsorship of the state. So if you look at what caught my attention, what took me to this conversation before the conflict between Russia and Ukraine was to see some of the beautiful churches that they were actually building throughout the country and throughout every region that was under the sponsorship of the Patriarch of Russia, right? I'm talking about basilicas that you cannot build with simple contribution, donations type of money. This is basilicas that have to be built. They actually build a replica of the Hagia Sophia. They actually build a beautiful cathedral within the installations of the armed forces, something that we never seen before, that is pretty similar in terms of even appearance about what the Basilica of St. Peter, which obviously today being one of the largest facilities, but very similar. Like, it almost compares. You couldn't build that kind of facility without the sponsorship of the state. So what does that all mean to us? Well, what does that have to do with the conflict? Well, we also have the Ukrainian Orthodox Church that, and by the way, there's two branches of that. One of them that was deeply connected already to the Russian Orthodox. They still are today under the leadership and the spiritual guidance of the Russian Patriarch of the Orthodox Church. But there was also another branch that was somewhere somehow saying, we don't think we should be under that leadership guidance. We actually claim to be under the leadership and the spiritual guidance of Constantinople. So the Patriarch of Constantinople somewhere somehow was introduced into this conversation. Every single one of those patriarchs enjoys a status that is actually called autocephalous, which means that they have their own head of hierarchy. They don't necessarily have to be answering to anybody else. That's where the term equals, right, comes in. But somewhere, somehow, the Patriarch of Constantinople decided to grant autocephalous to the Ukrainian church. That ended up angering Vladimir Putin tremendously. Needless to say, that also angered the Patriarch of Russia, and literally introduced what today is one of the second most significant ruptures, right? The Roman Catholic in 1054, and today, literally just a couple of years ago, is between 2018 and 2019, that this rupture takes place. And this is one of the second most meaningful ruptures between the apostolic churches. Did that have something to do with it? Unfortunately, we have more questions than answers. Is it a combination of the history of the state trying to reunite these countries, or is there a religious component that is taking place here that ended up adding more fuel to the fire? Whatever the reason is, we got to pay attention to these two things. Is there enough power for anybody to raise their voices and say, stop what's taking place, stop the killing, stop the destruction? And again, I'm just giving you some of the perspective that has been presented by phenomenal people. There was a great interview between Dr. Jordan Peterson and Dr. Frederick Kagan I highly recommend for you to actually take a look at that interview, because a lot of the points that we touch in right now were also discussed in that environment. Listen, history will judge Vladimir Putin. Was he a good president? Was he a horrible president? For many years, people argue that he was absolutely a phenomenal leader, a phenomenal president. It's very difficult to make that argument today in light of what's taking place with Ukraine. Is the Russian Orthodox Church doing the right thing by absolutely separating themselves from the Patriarch of Constantinople? What would be the damage that can do to the apostolic churches into that relationship? Are they taking advantage of a patriarchate that today has been, like I said, reduced to a few blacks? Only God knows. You will be the judge of that. You got to do your own research. But I want to highlight to you that these two things are happening at the same time, and there is a possibility that somewhere, somehow, they have something to do with what's taking place today. My name is Marvin Del Valle. We thank you for being part of the Daily Crossing. If you like some of the information, again, this was oversimplified just to make sure that we can give you some specific content. But if you like this information, please make sure to like, share, continue to subscribe. We want to grow the channel to continue to bring a lot of value and a lot of great information as part of the topics that we are going to continue to discuss. It's going to be an extended range. And we thank you for watching today. Take care.